This over here is a PCIe Gen 5 SSD. So what does that mean? It means that basically first time we are breaking the 10,000 megabytes per second barrier in sequential read and write speeds. But the question is, how does it compare to some of the high-end Gen 4 drives? And is it worth purchasing because the price tag on this one is a little bit more than the Gen 4 drives. Amazon Music Unlimited. I'll give you the best news from the get-go. If you sign up for the Amazon Music free trial through the links in the description below, you don't just get 1 month free trial, not 2, not 3, but 4-month free trial of Amazon Music. This is limited time only, so act fast through the links in the description below. So Amazon Music has over 100 million songs and podcasts, so whatever you're looking for, they've got it. Listen anywhere, offline and online, ad-free. Now you can also use your Alexa devices to voice command ask Alexa to play any song or podcast you want. We find it especially convenient when cooking in the kitchen. So sign up for the free trial right now through the links below and get 4 months for free. Limited time only, so act fast. So let's talk about some of the specs then. First of all, this Adata Legend 970 2 terabytes comes with a heatsink and with a little dongle attached to it, which we'll get to in a moment. This SSD is double-sided. I can see chips on both the bottom and on the top, and the heatsink actually has a thermal pad on the bottom to actually take some of the heat from the bottom off as well. Unfortunately, you're not able to remove this heatsink. As you can see, there's a warranty sticker on top of it. So if you just want to slot this into your motherboard's already built-in heatsinks, then that's not doable. And you have something here, this dingling thing, which is the fan power. There is a tiny little fan inside there that takes the air in and then blows it out, and then comes out from one side and then the other side kind of there. And then this is the SATA power for this, which you have to attach to the PSU. Now the cable is long enough so that you can do it, but it's not the longest cable either at the same way. Now, just to get the bad news out of the way first, this to me is the worst feature about this SSD, because even though this does support full fan speed, because this fan is not going to be adjusted like any lower, any higher, this just runs that constant speed all the time from the power. It would be nice if we had controls over it. For example, if this connector was PWM connector to the fan, where we can just put it on any of the motherboard headers, because often there is a header next to the top slot in there, so we can literally just put one chassis fan in there that's just above the top SSD slot, which would be very useful. Because you can't adjust the speed, this fan is very loud. Now, I've done this in an open test bench, but this is a much louder thing than any of the other components. GPU, CPU cooling, I've got an AIO pump and a 360mm rad, and another chassis fan there on the side, 140mm Noctua fan, and then this little guy makes the most noise. But does it work? Yes, it does work, because I didn't have any issues in terms of the thermals. It didn't heat up as much as some of the other drives that we have had with just heatsinks on Gen 4 drives. But now onto the good news and the benchmarks. First of all, let's have a look at the sequential read and write speed on Crystal Disk Mark, and we can see that on the sequential read, this Legend 970 2 terabyte one is quite a bit above than the rest. As you can see, the second place, which is the Solidigm P44 Pro, is about 30% slower than what we have here on the Adata, which is 9,995 megabytes per second. So the read is just 5 megabytes short, but if you do it again and in a different setup, you might get it over 10,000, but in my setup, I didn't manage to get this over 10,000. By the way, if you do want to check out my Testbench setup, I'm going to leave it in the description below. Another thing we do need to talk about is the actual compatibility with this one, because this is PCIe Gen 5 X4 slot, so there's 4 lanes of PCIe Gen 5 that this requires. You do need a special system or platform that supports that. Now, the Intel's 13th and 12th gen support that, as well as Ryzen 7000, but you need special motherboards for this because not all motherboards support PCIe Gen 5. And you might lose some of the other connectivities, for example, some of the Gigabyte boards. When you put this into the PCIe Gen 5 SSD slot, you're actually going to start to run the PCIe graphics card slot, the X16 slot at X8. So just bear in mind when you plug in the PCIe Gen 5 drive in, because you might lose some other things, so it's worth considering. And if you're wondering if this works backwards or backwards compatible, for example, if you have Gen 4 slot, then yes, it does work on the Gen 4 slot, but it will be capped at the Gen 4 speed, even though it can run. The same with Gen 3. And another very important thing is the caching. It uses SLC caching and a DRAM cache buffer as well. So it is quite a high-end drive there, so no corners cut there. Looking at the Crystal Disk Mark sequential write speed, and now we are passing the 10 gigabytes per second barrier. 10,116 megabytes per second, and as you can see, the second place KC3000 4TB drive is actually over 30% slower, and that's quite a big of a gap between those drives. As you can see, all of the high-end Gen 4 drives, they kind of perform all in the same bunch over there, but you can see, okay, this is something completely different, and here you can see Gen 3 kind of in the bottom there. Now moving on to some of the different benchmarks. This is PC Mark 10 Quick System benchmark, and this is a test that does lots of little tasks on the SSD drive. Something that you would do in a real world, like opening documents, reading photos, or opening photos, closing like some of the programs. It doesn't run the whole system or programs on it, but just browsing files and videos and just like less demanding tasks basically. And these drives that perform very well in this test are good for secondary drives on a laptop, for example, or in a device where you don't have very heavy use on the secondary drive, but perhaps just some more storage, but very fast file read and write speeds. And to no surprise, this Adata Legend 970 is the first place again, like very high scores, in fact quite a bit higher than the Samsung 990 Pro and Solidigm P44 Pro that are very good at random read and write speeds. But this Gen 5 drive now takes it to another level and is about 25% better than the best of the Gen 4 drives. Although I'd kind of say that it's a little bit of an overkill to use this just as a secondary drive to just, you know, browse photos and open documents and things like that. You don't really need that high-end performance for something like that. Moving on, PC Mark 10 data drive benchmark. And this benchmark tests the drive as more of a data drive that stores a little bit more data, usually things like NAS drives, memory cards, or USB sticks, or other storage devices. But this more like kind of writes more sequentially on it and then reads more sequentially on it, but perhaps doesn't actively work on those files that are stored there because they're like kind of data drives. Think of this as an archive drive for creators. And again, we can see that the Adata Legend 972 terabytes is right on the top there. And then the second place Samsung 990 Pro 1TB one is about 35% lower, which is quite a big gap there. But again, I wouldn't really suggest you getting this SSD as just an archive drive to store just files on it, because it's kind of a waste of, you know, performance on this drive as well. There's a reason what you want to use this drive for. Moving on to the PC Mark 10 full system drive benchmark, which basically replicates use case of a system or operating system drive there, or a drive that has a lot of programs on and actively works on projects. So if you're a creator, if you use it as a project drive and you're actively working with lots of photos or lots of videos or some other assets, then this is the test that will show you which drives are good for your workflow. But if you're looking for something as a project drive as a creator, then I highly recommend also checking out the consistency test and looking at them all in conjunction with each other, because you want to also know how well does the drive perform. If you're constantly loading the drive and reading like large files on it, like big video files, something like that, then that's very important here as well. Even though this full system drive benchmark doesn't use larger files as much, but it does actively work with projects and a bit more demanding workflows like we have creators, video editors, photographers, 3D creators, or others that might use large assets. And here, the Solidigm P44 Pro has been unbeaten for quite a long time until this Adata Legend 972 terabyte drive. As you can see, it is right on the top of the chart. It's at about 15% better than the Solidigm P44 Pro. So if you're looking for a very good system drive or a project drive, then this one looks like it's a good option there. I do want to mention the Solidigm P44 Pro 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte drives. They are very, very appealing because the performance difference and price difference compared to this one. And now the consistency test. This test is extremely intensive for the SSD. It writes over 23 terabytes of data on it and fills the drive about 3 times, and the whole test lasts about 20 hours, sometimes 24 hours. And it really tests the drive to its limits. How well does it handle the consistent read and write speed of the drive? So if you're a creator and you want to use it as a project drive that looked good on the previous test, then the consistency test also will show you how well does it perform if you're constantly putting new big video files on it. For example, let's say you are an editor and you put in 8K, 6K files there, raw files that are massive, either Canon Red RAW, even Blackmagic RAW. The files can go very, very big, which makes the sequential read and write speeds of the drive quite massive. Especially if we're editing multicam or something like that, it can get quite intensive for video and photo editors. So now, looking at the results, the Adata Legend 970 is not on top of the chart actually, but second. The first place is KC3000, which is about 2% faster than the Adata Legend 970 2 terabyte drive. But I want to mention that the drives that have larger capacity for this test and have DRAM cache will perform better and kind of aren't equally compared to like different capacity drives. So if you compare 2 terabytes versus 4 terabytes, then the 4 terabyte has an advantage because it's kind of, think of it like it's got a bigger space that you can fill with files, whereas the 2 terabyte drives, it takes more time to write the 23 terabytes and then take them off because you have to fill it and empty it, whereas the 4 terabyte one can get like bigger chunks of the files on it at the same time. And the KC3000 has 4 gigabytes of DRAM, whereas the Adata will have 2 gigabytes of DRAM cache, which also kind of makes sense why this is there. But what is impressive is that even though the half capacity of KC3000, we can see that this is still very, very impressive. But I would have expected it to perform right on the top just because of the fast sequential read and write speeds, but looks like perhaps maybe sometimes it's slightly overheating, even though whenever I tried and tested the drive or felt the drive when it was doing this test, it wasn't as hot as some of the other drives I tested. For example, the Netak NV7000 drives with the heatsink, they were very, 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 very hot, like burning my hand when touching them, whereas this was absolutely, yeah, it's hot, but it wasn't burning hot. And the last thing we want to check is the terabyte written spec, which is very important for creators, because if we're working with large files, we want to make sure that those cells in that SSD will actually be able to handle, our files. Samsung has set like the industry standard as 600 terabytes written per terabyte, but this Adata actually takes it slightly above and is a slightly above average, which is 700 terabytes written spec per terabyte. So this 2 terabyte model actually allows 1,400 terabytes written over the next 5 years, which the warranty lasts. So basically what that means is if you divide the days over 5 years with the 1,400 terabytes, then that will give you how many terabytes roughly on average you can rewrite the files on the drive every single day and delete them in order to kind of still be within the spec. If you don't write that many files a day, it just means that your SSD in theory will last longer. It's basically like a car warranty that you can get for example, often you see a 100,000 kilometers or like a 60,000 miles or 5 years or 7 years, whichever one like kind of hits first. So this is the same bit over here, terabytes written spec. But if your terabyte written spec is much more, then imagine like a car, mileage. Imagine if you're allowed 100,000 miles in warranty or 5 years, and let's say you drive a lot, you're thinking, wow, even if I fill the whole 100,000 miles over the next 5 years, it's still going to be within warranty, which is very impressive if they allow you to do that. So in conclusion, I would say if you're looking for a very high-end drive for a creator, so whether you're looking for an OS drive or a project drive, I think this drive is an excellent performer there. And as you can see, it performs right on the top there. Perhaps there's some other Gen 5 drives that can be even better, but I haven't tested any. I've tried to make my database as large as I can, testing as many different drives as possible. This is probably one of the best ones to get. It's very good at the random read and write speeds for the likes of operating systems and programs, as well as large files or working with large files like project files as a video, photo, 3D creator. If budget is not a concern for you, definitely get this one. I'm gonna leave the link in the description below. But if you do want to save some money, what are some of the other options that you can get? Firstly, if you do want to save some money, why don't you pick up some merch from technotiststore.com and go with the Solidigm P44 Pro, which you can see is actually right on top of the charts. Often on par with the Samsung 990 Pro or even better, but is a lot more affordable. So I'll leave that in the description below as well if you want to check that out. So as a creator, now you should know if this drive is worth purchasing. And if you don't know which creator PC to build, but you're thinking, do you know what? I think it's time I actually pull the trigger and build myself a really good system that actually is good for my workflow and is the best bang for buck, so that I'm not wasting any money on parts that don't give me actual performance, then check out the build guides in the description below. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.